to address their issues, they would usually be guided by emotional outbursts or responses, or be drawn into the banal and juvenile arguments that were designed wrongly by de facto operators, and they would refer to it as race arguments and prejudice arguments, and they would bury themselves into the corporate constructs of what is known as the 14th Amendment, dead being civil liter mortuus platform, seeking civil remedies that were actually never to be satisfied, etc. Again, I think clearly many people have not looked at the Constitution as having been seated, actually seated, knowingly, and knowing that that there were beings among us that would never honor them. However, from a dimensional concept, it was seated because it is known, and it was known by the ancestors, that those principles would have to be applied, even though they were being abridged. They would have to be applied as things began to fall apart. Because that Constitution, the principles that underpin that Constitution for the United States are rooted in nature's God and nature's law, as many of you seen in the unanimous Declaration of Independence, etc., and was adopted by hybrid Europeans and Asiatics who were in the Continental Congress, etc., for organized government. However, by the hybrid Europeans making so much effort to write the Moors out of history, and to write the Moors out of the fact that the Continental Congress was predominated by Aboriginal Moors, etc., and hiding also the fact, as an example, of the first president for the United States being John Hanson, who was a Moor, etc., and he was the only one to use the Great Seal. No other president for the United States used that Great Seal. That's why you never see any of them speak under the Great Pyramid with the Eye of Horus on it, because that is the insignia of the Moorish nation. And this is again why many of them who really know that will misrepresent the Great Seal Pyramid as a devil symbol to hide it from the people and to make them think that it is demonic, when they find out why the presidents never speak under it. They always speak under Aquila, our bird, etc., with the shield in front of the bird, etc. This is also why the Congress for the operations was laid out architecturally in the format of a bird standing, i.e. Aquila, etc. So symbolically, they tell the history in the architecture at Washington, even with the star of Anail, or the pentagram, i.e. five-pointed star of man, Venus, etc., that is derived from the Moorish flag, etc. And Washington, D.C., the seven hills, which they refer to as the seven hills of Rome, are laid out accordingly. Go ahead.
May I interject? So I know that those symbols are Moorish in their origin, but what about the fact that Freemasonry and some of quote unquote Luciferian type out,
the corruption.
Yeah, utilize that. I mean, how were they able to infiltrate and take that and then give it the negative?
It's not so much infiltration. You got to look at the reality. The hybrid Europeans were brought into government. You got to remember, even the word slave deals with Slovakian. It's an identity. It's really not what you call a social status. It is connotatively presented as a depraved, defeated, and subjugation status, but that's connotative, distinguished from denotative, for it is not the etymology of the word. However, for those of you who know some history, do a little research into the Knights Templar and the relationship and the not so subtle attacks and wars, you can call it that because that's not what it boils down to, initiated against Knights Templars by the popes of Rome for purposes all of which we will not go into at this time. And Knights Templars came to the North America in the area of around 1857 and blended themselves into the Freemason order, and they've been operating and executing on both their sides under very what you would call nefarious means, the subjugation of and the plan of subjugating all of humanity. Now, for people who may not comprehend certain fundamental truths, this is one fundamental truth so that you can use your own reasoning thought. Because remember, things have been so corrupted that you're going to have to use your intelligence to discern right from wrong, falsehood from truth, truth from misrepresentations. Masonry is essentially astrology. I repeat, Masonry is essentially astrology. Now, what's evil about astrology, other than what the popes of Rome told you? However, Masonry is used by hybrid Europeans to study ancient Canaanite, Moabite, and Sabian culture for the purpose of rulership, because that is earth culture. Cosmology is earth culture. The fact that people have misused the knowledge is what should be addressed. Are we clear? I think people, and all of us can be subject to this. You know how like you may, I remember when I was younger, my father was telling me, because I used to go out in the woods and collect flowers and stuff like that. And I remember my father used to tell me a story about one of the little flowers that I had, and they called it forget-me-not. It was a little flower called forget-me-not, and he told me about the flower got its name by a man who was courting his beautiful girlfriend, and he took her onto a stream, a river, something like that, in a boat, and he had these flowers for her, and a mishap occurred, and she drowned. And so the flower that he was giving her was referred to as forget-me-not. That's how the flower got its name. However, when you look at the seed of both flowers, the seed of Constitution, because it's seeded, and keep in mind, the earth was seeded with humanity, all life forms were seeded. The Constitution for the United States was seeded from ancient Muslim principles and law for governance and harmony. For those of you who've done some research, you will recognize that the hybrid Europeans were fighting with each other, and as well as with us, in relationship to taking over our trade routes and also taking over the trade routes of each other. And it became apparent that it was necessary for them to come to some fundamental agreements in order to stabilize operations at North America. And this has much to do with the motivations of them doing the adjustments that were made in the Federalist Papers to the Constitution, the Association, etc., and the minor adjustments of accepting the Constitution as a foundation law, etc., to stabilize operations here at North America. And of course, that Constitution actually, in its principle, far superseding its adaptation in the 1700s, etc., because it comes from ancient principles, etc., was adopted for stability. And while at the same time, many of the hybrid Europeans had no intentions of honoring the treaties and the Constitution, they just bided their time and slow walked, and little bit by little bit, which in their documentations on many levels you will find, encroached on the allodial rights of the Aboriginal people, i.e. us. And keep in mind, while they call us Indians, North America is not India. And keep in mind, Hindustan or Sindh, just below China, is not India either. That is Sindh. And also, over a couple thousand years ago, we renamed it Hindustan. And so when you hear the word Hindu, Sindh, Hindustan, that's where the dialectical corruption of the word Indian has its life, etc. And the first of the Phoenicians and Moors, etc., in the Western Hemisphere that were referred to as Indians by the hybrids, you're dealing with the islands, i.e. Boricain, the Taino tribes, and the Carib, i.e. which you would know as Trinidad, etc. These areas that they refer to us as Indians, and as time passed, the word traveled and was applied generally to the northern part too, to all Aboriginal and indigenous people in general, to the land, etc. But keep in mind, for those of you who are real scholars, you already know that India or Indian is a made-up word, and that if you're going to talk about so-called Indian history at North America and South Central America and the islands, then you must talk about the Naga and the Dravidians. So if you're not knowledgeable about the Dravids and Naga, then don't talk about Indians, because that would be indicating that you really don't know the real history. However, that does not condemn, nor does it disrespect the rightful intent by many of our people in actions and organizations where the people are trying to restore their divine right of a state via sovereign right of the people of the land in the different formats. But nevertheless, if we're going to solve problems, we have to tell the truth about what's going on. North America and its people are not Indians. They are Canaanites, Moabites, and that's the truth. You know, the modern name used, universal, for Asiatic Africans is more all over the world. That's a fact. It's just short for Moroccan or descendants of Moroccans, referred to as our descendants, which means al, which means descendant, coming down from Moroccans, and also referred to as Americans. So the Americans are you, the copper complexion people with hair like lamb's wool, skin like burnished brass. It's no secret. However, we've been suffering occupation, reconstruction of the history and the chronologies, reconstruction of the politics. But back to point, keep in mind that Masonry has been corrupted, and the Europeans, the hybrid Europeans, were brought into government, and the principles for that constitution was given to them. It was not constructed by them, it was adopted by them. Make that very clear.
Question from Photo Factory wants to know what your thoughts are on the young Maroon chief in the territory of Jamaica. He proclaimed he is a Moor, and Vice did a documentary on him.
Because that is true. The Maroons, and the Maureen's are Moors. All of those are pedigree names coming from Moorish background. All of those people are Moors. Trinidad, they're Moors. And see, it must be comprehended, because I think a lot of times, because of the dialectical, linguistic changes, or the different territories where we may speak the trade language. So the international Creole language for trade international is called English. You all need to know that English is not a language by itself. It's not. It's really Creole, and that is a blending of multiple linguistic forms for the purpose of international trade. That's a fact. And those of you on the islands that speak different aspects of Moorish Latin, falsely referred to as Spanish. I repeat, Moorish Latin in its multiple dialects, falsely referred to as Spanish, and its different Latin dialects are spoken from the north to the south by different groups of Asiatic Africans, etc., who will often refer to themselves, playing it safe by saying they're of African Indian descent rather than saying that they're Moors. But that's the fact. You're African. Get over it. You're Moors. And so the islands, you're still Moors, and this is your land. When you come to the north or any other part, you're simply going to another part of your own land. Keep that in mind. And don't let the hybrid fool you, giving you green cards and making you pay them, who's the real foreigner and the real alien, paying them to travel on your own land. So we got to solve that too.
Another question? Can you take it? It's kind of off the subject, but I'll ask you.
Yeah.
It's from Black Space. Could you ask Grand Sheik about the unknown planet, second moon that's circling the Earth every 24 hours? Dick Gregory often spoke of it later in his life. Could you shed some light on that?
My position has always been this. The same, and it's been the same with the black sun or the dark sun that energizes this particular sun, etc. I'm more interested in us solving the problems at Midgard on Earth before we get overly concerned about the other moons, or even Nibiru, or even the moons around Saturn. Not that they're not of concern. Our major concern is to solve this problem with the hybrid Romans who have been destroying Midgard, and the restoration of the estates of the Aboriginal people at Midgard that you know as Earth. In other words, my position with all of these things is, and has always been, for those of you who have known me, I've pretty much focused for the last 30, 35, 40 years on civics, which is also why I founded the Roundtable in 1982, is because it's sort of like very often we get distracted, and not that it's actually a distraction, because all these things are of interest to us. Indeed, they are, and not to be dismissed. But it's almost like us bringing up a conversation about, and it's not that it's not of interest, so don't misunderstand where I'm coming from. How many pockmarks are in the moon or on the surface of the moon? Nevertheless, most of the people here who have been suffering at the hands of these demonic priesthood don't know that a marriage certificate that has been destroying their families is a bank bond, that the birth certificates are a bank bond backing U.S. corporation debt, that the driver's license is an absolute fraud, that traffic court is for human trafficking, has no constitutional foundation whatsoever. And these are some of the things, just some of them, which have been sorely injuring our people socially, politically, and economically, including their lack of knowledge of even knowing what a quo warranto is, or challenging the jurisdiction of foreign aliens who have been pretending to be Americans, who have been genociding our people. And I'm just saying, I'm more interested in dealing with those matters than talking about the other moons.
Here's one more. Claudio Rogers says, here in Australia, a Filipino got up in court and said he is a descendant of a Moor.
Because he is. Because remember, Filipinos is named after Philip.
Conqueror.
They ain't Filipinos, they're Moors. I'm glad because they know it. It's just that this stuff is not unknown. It's just that very few people will get up because remember, for the last couple hundred years, we've been trained under animal husbandry to hate our African blood. And so many of these people will knowingly know our people are Moors, are reluctant to admit that they're Moors because they don't want to get hung. They don't want to get lynched. And so they say they're black and people of color, which means artificial person. So it doesn't cause their masters to be peeved, because Romans are well known to be the so-called, quote unquote, Negro God. It's just that people don't say it openly. They just worship them. They won't buy, they won't sell, they won't breathe without a license from the hybrid Europeans who have been pretending to be Americans for the last couple hundred years. That's their God. That's why half of them won't admit that they're Moors, because they're scared, and also because they hate themselves. Now, keep in mind, seated, a lot of people, when they look at the Constitution for the United States, it doesn't dawn on them. As an example, for those of you who have been doing some research and knowing some of the social political dynamics that's taken place at North America, particularly in the last maybe 113, 114 years, are very familiar with our illustrious prophet here, Sheikh Sharif Abdul Ali, known commonly to the people as Prophet Noble Drew